watching The Producer's Room, a streaming web series featuring the creators behind the hit songs of today's music industry. Songwriters, music producers, and artists discuss their creative process as well as examining current issues and technologies in today's rapidly changing music business. Your host is producer, songwriter, and educator Dave Tuff. Welcome to The Producer's Room.
Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode of Dave's Waves. We're going to talk all about drums and drum miking. In fact, we're probably going to take a couple weeks to discuss drums, so I hope you guys enjoy it. Okay, I wanted to show you guys what console we were using for the setup. This is our first round of a full setup. This is a vintage API console out of the Wally Hyder truck, so it's pretty much API 312 style preamps, punchy, and all of that. Got some vintage rack gear 1176s that we're going to use for the room mics, or for the trash mics, and perhaps an LA2A down there, and Corey on Pro Tools, and Pro Tools up there. So anyway, that's the console. Hey guys, welcome to Dave's Waves again. And like I mentioned in the intro video, this is a multi-part series on drum recording. It doesn't really matter if you're at a home studio or at a larger commercial studio, because it's about the signal chain. It's the microphone, which we're going to talk about mainly today, shooting out different microphones, and then of course the preamp and the recorder itself, the converters in the recorder itself. So really it's just a three-part stage: microphone, preamp, and recorder. And so really not that much to think about. But I had a lot of questions about different miking techniques and different miking styles and different microphones. And I'm always interested too to question my own drum miking techniques. So we took a day and a half and we shot out a bunch of drums. Of course, one factor that's obvious in that equation is the room for drums. But what I was speaking to here is a kick-in mic, which we're going to do for our first shootout. And really the room for a kick-in mic, it's not going to matter too much. When we get to room mics, obviously the room is a big part of the equation. So that's where you might want to go use a commercial studio. But on this particular shootout, we varied the kick-in mics. You'll see it labeled kick-in there. I'm going to mute these for now and talk about them in a moment. Once again, thanks to our drummer, Eb Gepner, a Nashville drummer session and live. So I'll give him a plug. And EBB GEP NER, Eb Gepner, Ebert Gepner. And he was patient enough to be with us for a day and a half, shooting out a bunch of drums and a bunch of microphones for some pizza and some thanks. So Eb brought his Fibes kit. It's a pretty cool kit, pretty cool looking, as you saw in the introduction video. And it's a Fibes kit, Austin era, 22 by 18 maple. So to me, that's a pretty standard kick drum size. You might get a 22 by 16 or something like that. But it's a good, well-rounded kick drum, good sounding kick drum in the room to try out some mics on. So that's what we did. And once again, you'll see this top line. We shot out a bunch of microphones. In fact, let me just go ahead and hide these real quick so you guys just focusing on this particular track. The other thing I wanted to mention before we actually start listening is look how consistent these waveforms are as far as dynamics. Number one, you're going to get that from a good, consistent drummer that knows how to dynamically hit an instrument at the same volume over and over again. So that's our good drummer in the equation. But also, these first few mics we're shooting out are dynamic mics. Obviously, if you do some reading on mic techniques, you're probably going to use a large diaphragm dynamic microphone most of the time on kick drum. A couple reasons there. Number one, it takes high SPLs or sound pressure levels because drums are loud, right? They could get up to 120, 130 dB if the drummer's hitting them loud enough, especially a kick drum, snare drum, things like that. So a dynamic mic will purposefully limit the range of the kick drum mic, and it does that with natural compression because it takes a lot of inertia to move that moving coil inside the dynamic mic. Therefore, once again, it's almost like a natural compression. If you see these waveforms, you'll see they're pretty consistent, and that's half of a great drummer and half of a dynamic mic. Once we get down to these condensers, you're going to see a little bit more variance in the waveform. So with that said, it was interesting to shoot these out. You can always go and look at frequency response. In fact, I had typed in frequency response D6, but our first mic is an RE20. So let's just look at RE20.
The frequency response for a RE20, EV RE20, Electro Voice RE20. You can see here going down to 10 hertz all the way up to 20K, which is as high as we can hear as humans, or at least some of us can hear that high. I think my hearing goes about right there. But and this is obviously more felt than heard, but we can still get down to all the way down to 20 as human beings, but I'm sure whales can hear lower than us. So long story made short, this graph shows us what the microphone naturally boosts. So the way I want you to think about this when we're going through the shootout is a microphone is a natural EQ. One of our jobs as recording engineers is to capture things as accurately as we can. That's why they call it an album, like a picture album. We're capturing photographs of the music or at a point in time. And so it's always nice to use the right microphone on the front end so we don't have to alter it on the back end using EQ. You can always alter it using EQ, but number one, that takes a lot of time. And number two, it might add some unwanted distortion or artifacts that you may not want. So choose the right microphone on the front end, and that's what we're trying to achieve today with the kick drum. So let's just listen to the RE20. You'll notice it has a very what we call flat response, pretty even amongst the whole frequency spectrum here. Maybe a little bit of boost, or the mic naturally turns up somewhere between like 5 and 10K. But I always encourage you to go and type in frequency response of the mic itself and look at Google image search. So let's just hear the RE20 on a kick drum. And some of you may be asking what the placement was. We pretty much did, I'd say a good foot from the actual batter head where the kick drum's hitting right there. So this is a picture inside with the RE20. I personally like to angle my mics. I just have found a little bit of off axis. Now be careful if it's a hypercardioid mic, but this is a cardioid mic, and most of these are cardioid mics, meaning they have directionality. They pick up what's in front of them, but they still pick up a fairly wide range of sounds in front of them. They're a wider pickup pattern than, say, like a supercardioid or a hypercardioid. So I angle it a little bit. Don't put it right up against the beater. I think his beater was a hard type of felt. You'll hear that. And so this, if you want to guess how much this is inside the front, I would say 6 inches inside the front of the drum, so you can kind of see the mic there. And of course, the hard part with these mics is always keeping them solid and not keeping the kick drum moving. So we're using a rug, and we're also using a beanbag here. But enough talk, let's listen. Here's an RE20. So nice even sound, and you can hear the point. You can hear that boost between 5 and 10K that we were talking about on the top. Let's play it one more time. All right, so let's move on to the D112. Same placement. I could show you guys all these pictures of our placements, but same idea on all these mics. Here's the D112. It looks like it's a little bit further off. Not too bad, though. Obviously, you know about proximity effect, which says the closer we move a mic to a source, the more bass we're going to get. But all things equal, we tried to keep these as evenly spaced from the batter head as we could. This photo looks like it's a little bit further away, but it's also probably the angle of the photo. But that said, know that we tried to minimize that as a variable in our mic shootout. So let's listen to the D112. So I'll go back to the RE20 now. D112. Okay, so let's look at the frequency response of a D112 now and see what we're getting. AKG mic, of course. I didn't know it was discontinued. I'm sure they have a newer alternative. So one thing you probably heard right away is that it had a deeper bass. At least I heard it. And that is true by the frequency response curve. In fact, it has a boost, it looks like, around 100. Like a 4 or 5 dB boost around 100. And then it looks like the peak is a little bit lower than where it was on the RE20. And it's a little bit more of a pronounced peak. It's a peak right between 2 and 5K, which then makes sense for the kick drum. So
as we go along, what you're going to notice with some of these mics, and we didn't design it this way, but the more modern rock and pop kick sounds, at least developing from the 80s till today, are a kick sound that has pronounced low end, pronounced high end for the click, the clicky part of the kick, and typically some type of dip in the mid range of some type. And obviously, all of this is per taste and per song, per engineer. I always kind of compare it to a palette of colors. An artist can paint with yellow or red or green. None of those are wrong. It's just what they're feeling. And same thing with microphones. It's kind of what sound we're going for. But if you're going for the modern pop rock sound, you're going to start to want to get some of these curves in your microphone for kick drum. We could always add them later once again, but it's nice to have them in the microphone. So the D112 is getting us to that particular point. It's getting us to the point where we have a boost on the low end and a dip in the mids a little bit, and then a boost on the high end. So once again, one more time, RE20, D112. Just really a totally different sound. All right, so now let's move on to the Electro Voice 602, and this is the mic I've been using with my live band for a while now. And I'm going to go ahead and type in the frequency response of that. Okay, so there's the mic, and trying to find a good graph here. So I'm not sure exactly where the axis is where they're measuring this on this particular graph, but you can see in this mic it has almost the exact same idea as the D112, but more pronounced. Let's see if we can find, I didn't really see a better one. That's the D112. Sorry guys. Let me go back here. It's E602. Not that that really matters, but we'll type it in. And if I can spell Sennheiser, I don't know if I'm smart enough there. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, gosh, that's killer. So gosh, look at this microphone. It's even more pronounced of that dip in the mids. Look, it has this huge boost, and actually the boost I think on the D112 it was like around 100, and it wasn't this pronounced. But this one has a huge boost, almost 8 dB between 50 and 100. So it's going to have more low end, I would assume, when we listen to it. I haven't heard it yet. Dip in the mids, like I said, and then we get here, and it has that same 2 to 5K boost that the D112 did, but it continues on all the way up to like 15K and then drops down. And once again, this is a more drastic boost. So this is even giving us more of that kind of smiley face curve. And let's see if that's correct. Let's listen to it. Yep, sounds like it to me. So let's do all three of those one more time. So RE20's flat, D112 just a little bit of a smiley face, EV602 just from the way the mics are constructed, even more of a smiley face. So let's check it out. RE20, D112, EV602. Three totally different beasts. Isn't it funny that all these large diaphragm mics can sound so drastically different? Okay, so speaking of this smiley face curve, the next two mics are kind of in that whole range of a pretty extreme boost on the clicky top end and the really low bottom end, just different variants of it. So Shure Beta 52. Let's go. I was doing my image search, and looks like that guy. Well, actually, it depends on proximity. We were just talking about proximity effect, and we said that the closer the mic is, the more bass you're going to get. So I think ours was, I'm not going to say 2 feet away, but a good, not 2 inches away either. We're probably somewhere in here. So we're still going to probably get a boost in the lows, but one thing you're going to notice about this particular mic is that it has a boost even lower than the 602 did. So that tells me that this is going to have even more sub to it than that 602 we just listened to. Then a huge dip in the mids, like even more than any of the mics we've been listening to. And then a huge peak around, what is it, like 5K? And then it drops off. So unlike the 602 that kept going and then dropped off, this guy has just a tiny little peak here
around, I don't know, 5K, 4K, 5K, and then kind of dramatically drops down. So let's check it out. This is the Beta 52. So you can definitely hear more low end, I believe. Yeah, than the 602. Same idea though. And not as much top. So gosh, our frequency response curves are doing us well. All right, next mic in this whole category is Audix D6. So let's check that guy out. Pretty commonly used mic. Those aren't my favorites. I like to get a little bit more detail. Yeah. So let's see what this guy's doing. Once again, pretty big boosts down here. Pretty comparable to the Beta 52, but it seemed like the Beta 52 just kept going up and up and up, which I'm not sure exactly where it dropped off because that curve didn't show it, but around the same comparable low end as the Beta 52, drop in the mids again, and then a drastic high end, kind of like the 602. So to me, this has the top end of what the 602 had, where it's going fairly far up and then dropping, and it has the bottom close to the Beta 52. So let's see what this guy sounds like. Yeah, so pretty much right on. Let's listen to all three of those smiley face mics again. So one more time. So totally different flavors. Throughout the session, I kind of grew fond to the D6. I'd never really used it a lot, but I kind of grew fond to it. My personal preference is I do like some of that high end in there, and but I do like a little bit lower than the 602, so it's kind of something that spoke to me. Now, we did a few other, so those were the main mics that we tried out, but we did a few other experiments. So we did a Sennheiser 421 just because, you read all these articles about analog tape recording, and it seems like it was a pretty popular mic back in the 1970s, early 80s on kick drum. So let's look at the 421. No, not Audix. Google, you're putting words into my mouth. Sennheiser. Okay. So once again, based on proximity, this looks decent. So, okay, so this tells me already that we're pretty flat down here. So remember that smiley face curve? This half is gone away. The low end is gone. It is going to give us some click up here, but really it dips off there, and not a huge boost like some of those others, but it is going to give us some click around 5K again. But the low end is what worries me, so let's listen to it. But it's always how it sounds, not how it looks. And yes, if you compare that to like the Beta 52, it does have the click, but it doesn't have the low end. So that makes sense to me historically, and I'll tell you why. Because analog tape really didn't have the bandwidth that digital recording did. Analog tape may have died out somewhere around here, 10K, 15K. Definitely didn't have the high crispies that we're used to today with digital recording, and it definitely didn't go down to anywhere lower than 40, I would say. It didn't have 20 to 40. You wouldn't have heard somebody, driving through a neighborhood, blasting some sub bass in their car, listening to an 8-track tape. Back in the 1970s, those frequencies weren't there. So with the rise of hip hop, et cetera, we got more used to this lower frequencies where digital recording came in the early 80s, and it started to be more prevalent in the early 90s. So that makes total sense to me historically why the 421 was used as a kick mic. Now I can see perhaps you using this in conjunction with another mic, so multi-microphones, this microphone to get the click and another microphone to get the low end, which we'll talk about here in a minute, but we're focusing on single mics at this particular point. I'll go ahead and get rid of that. And then we just said, hey, you know what? If we're talking about this whole getting the click thing, let's do two more particular microphones. Let's do Let's do a KM84, which is a classic. Now, they don't make that one anymore. They make the 184, but Neumann small diaphragm condenser mic. So once again, the condenser is going to give us a more even frequency response, but it's not going to have the low end similar to the Sennheiser 421 in that the low end just won't exist, or at least that's my guess on this one. There's comparing the old 84 and the new 184, but basically you got the same beast here. And yes, it's fairly flat, although it's giving more low end than I would think it would actually, but pretty flat response. It's not going to have the proximity that some of these dynamics are going to have, and it's also small diaphragm. But and let me show you what it looks like, by the way, in case you're not familiar with small diaphragm condenser mics. So there's our Neumann KM184. So we put it on there. So to me, it kind of looks pretty similar to the RE20 pickup pattern, but let's check it out. KM184 or KM84. Yeah, I'm just not digging that for this particular use. Now, on a jazz session, I can see that. I do like the natural compression of the dynamic mics, and that's just me. And so these next three are all small diaphragm condensers. I would recommend you guys check out the Gauge ECM 84. We'll talk about that in a minute, but I was pretty impressed with it. It's a basically $100 mic made by Gauge, small diaphragm condenser, just like that. And you know, it has a little bit of more jumpies up here than the 84 did, but man, I dug it. But not on a kick drum use. So we'll listen to all three of these real quick. These are all variants of the small diaphragm condenser. 84, ECM 84, better, and an MXL 991. Okay, so you heard it. And then we said, well, let's check out a couple other techniques used in the 70s, which were U47 FET, large diaphragm condenser, non-tube. Of course, these are all solid state or transistor mics as well. Non-tube, so let's just check that out. So that's a FET inside the kick. Wasn't too impressed, but it's actually more pleasing to my ear than the small diaphragms were. Let's do an SM7. This is actually an idea that we kind of got by saying, you know, what if you're at a studio that has a limited mic selection? SM7 technically is a large diaphragm dynamic mic, although we think about it more being used on voice or guitars or something. But we didn't hate it, but I'll play it. It has a nice click to it, but still you're not getting the low end of the modern sound. And then finally, Beyer M88, another mic that was used pretty commonly 70s, 80s. But it has that mid-range in there. So really our favorites in the shootout, not trying to bias you guys, were EV602, Beta 52, and Audix D6. But let's real quick listen through all of those one more time. I'll kind of click around and I won't talk so that you can gauge everything yourself. So here we go. And you can just read the titles up here.
All right, so one other thing I wanted to talk about that's germane to our kick shootout is using multiple mics. So we did a few other setups, but with this particular setup, we had what we call a Yamaha sub kick on the outside. So let's just Google that so you guys can see what that looks like. I don't know if I had a picture of it. You can probably see it in the intro movie that we did. But yeah, we basically did exactly that technique there. We spaced it, three or so inches from the kick drum. And what this is going to give us is basically a reverse speaker effect, where it's going to give us a lot of chunk of low end. And I mean, I would probably even guess that these are just harmonics, but a huge dip in the mids. So really it's used for bass. It's all about that bass. It fills in that 20, 40 hertz that we now have today with digital recording. We did that, and then we also did one more mic that I'll pull up. We did a Coles ribbon mic, one of my favorites, 4038, and we did that about a foot from the kick, about a foot away from the kick and about a foot or a foot and a half off the ground, pointed right towards the kit. So this may change your impression of the mics a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually play them all with the exact same sub kick, so that doesn't become a variable. But let me let you listen to the sub kick first. So a couple more things I should mention. You want to make sure that your sub kick, wherever it is, on the outside of the head or a little bit further away, and your actual kick-in mic, well, anytime you're doing multiple microphone techniques, you want to make sure they're in phase. In this particular session, we used, I think it's called the Radial Phaser, one of my new toys as well, and it allows you to check the phase on your particular recording, not only by inverting it, which is traditional on most consoles, by flipping the phase 180 degrees, but also by doing a phase shift with a little knob here. And we flipped through there and we found where it sounded the fullest, and then we left it there. So we got the kick out and kick in phase, at least the best to our ability. And then what I want you guys to hear is if adding the sub kick to reinforce the kick in mic changes your impression of which mic you liked for your particular style of music. So let's go ahead and listen to these together. I did turn this one up just a little bit, turn this one down just a little bit, and I'm going to go ahead and mute my voice so you guys can hear it real accurately all the way through. The one other thing I should mention is if you're listening on earbuds, obviously you're not going to get the full gist of this. In fact, that leads me to another tangent, which we may not have time for, but if you look at Apple earbuds frequency response, you'll notice that you're not really hearing any of this accurately. So make sure make sure you're not going to get any of that from the sub kick. So make sure you're listening onto a generally flat monitoring system when you listen back to this. So you're going to have some low end in your monitoring system to perceive what we're doing here. All right, so I'm going to flip through all different kicks, maybe 4 hits with the sub kick in. Oops, let's turn on the kick in. All right, so there's where it was. In my particular opinion, one thing I noticed on the SM7, it actually did
help it out a lot. So some mics, it's going to help out a lot. The condensers, small diaphragm condensers, I could still, let them go for this particular application. But like something like the SM7, you'll hear that it does have that point. And you add the sub kick in. And now it's kind of a nice rounded beast. Whereas some of these guys that we like the curve on, I'm not going to say it interfered, but it may not be the best match. Let's listen with and without on these three mics that we liked the curve on, at least for rock and pop music. Without, with, without, with, without, with. So there may, it's up to you, but there may or may not be some buildup of some frequencies there on masking on the lower mids, upper lows. One thing also we noticed when listening to Subkick is it does have a particular tone. So you just want to be aware of that. I mean, it has a real small melodic sense to it. So you might try tuning your Subkick if you have one of those with some, a lug tightener, or loosen the lugs on the Subkick because it does have lugs just like any normal drum. It's just a microphone. And you may even think about tuning it to the key of your song. One last thing about our kick-in shootout, and then we'll call it a day on this particular episode of Dave's Waves, is we did the Coles 4038 right in front of the kick drum. And I call this my John Bonham mic. So if you want a roomier sound for your kick, you might think about doing a technique like this. So let me just kind of play you this mic by itself so you can hear what it sounds like. We'll just throw in maybe these 2 or 3 middle mics here. So here's the Coles 4038. So once again, it's going to be consistent because it's the same kick drum and the same microphone for all of these. The only thing that changed was the top one. But now let's add the top mics in, and you can kind of see where I'm going with this as far as a roomier kick drum sound. So I'm going to move this up here. Sub is muted. So it's D112 with the kick out, not Royer, Coles mic. Okay, EV602 without, with, Beta 52 without, with, D6 without, with. Lastly, I'm going to wrap it up by just playing all 3 mic combinations together. And obviously the kick-in mic is going to be the only variable here. And I just want you to hear some of these different combinations. I won't play all of them. I'll go ahead and mute my voice and we'll roll out with this. Thanks again for watching this episode of Dave's Waves. Come back next time and we'll do some more drum shootouts.
Hey guys, hope you enjoyed this episode of Dave's Waves. See you next time.